Hey everyone, this is Devan, and today I will be reviewing Cyberpunk 2077. I don't think my opinion on a game has ever shifted as drastically as it has with Cyberpunk. I bought the game at launch on the PS5 and thought it was a pretty underwhelming experience. I decided to jump back in after the next gen patch and was amazed at how much the game has been improved. I was only intending to finish up some of the side quests that I never got around to, but ended up starting a new playthrough and completing it. The first major change that stands out is the improvement to the visuals. They did more than just add ray tracing and increase the resolution. The entire lighting and reflection engine has been improved. Everything now feels more vibrant. The sun radiates through the environment during the day, and at night, the game fulfills the promise of being able to walk through the neon-soaked streets of Night City. The pre-patched last-gen version felt drab and muted by comparison. It didn't help that the last-gen version had major issues with pedestrian and traffic density. The traffic and pedestrians would oftentimes despawn as soon as you would approach it. It felt like you were driving and walking through a ghost town much of the time. Thankfully, this has been solved. Night City now feels alive. With improved AI pathing, it actually feels like a city where people are busy and have somewhere to be. This restores much of the immersion that was lost on the first outing. But nothing was more immersion breaking than the numerous, well-documented bugs that plagued the game at launch. While most have been fixed, I still encountered some noticeable issues during my second playthrough. There were points where NPCs were floating in midair while I was driving down the road. Other times, NPCs would walk through walls. Most of the bugs didn't impact the gameplay, but the devs still have some issues to patch, and thankfully, they seem to be working on it. Now for the gameplay, I didn't truly enjoy the amount of depth the game had until my second playthrough. During my first playthrough, I spec'd most of my experience points towards pistols, since they were the easiest to build for damage. I also spec'd towards crafting so that I could craft legendary guns. My playstyle mostly consisted of popping headshots with my silenced pistol, then finishing the rest off with Conrad's hammer once I got detected. While there was nothing wrong with this style, it eventually just felt like Far Cry, and this game has quite a bit more to offer. There's an entire community dedicated to optimizing different builds. People make knife throwing builds, grenade only builds, fists only builds, hacking only builds. There's so much diversity and options in the playstyles. I spent more time than I would like to admit planning out which attributes and perks I would get, which weapons I would upgrade, and which cyberware I would buy. Since you'll never have enough points to get all of the attributes and perks, there is quite a lot of strategy involved. I finally settled on the samurai build, and it changed the game completely. With a leveled up samurai build, you can lunge from enemy to enemy, chaining kills. You can turn invisible, and slow down time to dismember enemies. You feel like a freight train barreling through your opponents. While stealth in most games is normally a careful experience, where you have to crouch and slowly walk around to silently take down opponents, the stealth in Cyberpunk is a fast, hit-and-run experience. There's so much momentum to the combat. It's unlike any first-person shooter I've played. The amount of abilities at your disposal makes you feel like a cyborg superhero. There are still some issues that need smoothing out though. It takes too long to engage the sprint, making the movement feel heavier than it should. Getting in and out of slow motion can also feel awkward at times. But overall, I think the combat is the strongest aspect of Cyberpunk, and it's one of the better ones in a first-person shooter. Now, driving is very important to me in games like this, and I thought the driving in the pre-patched version felt pretty good. The problem with it was that it was too hard to correct the oversteer in the cars. I would take a corner, swing out the back end, and when I would apply countersteer, my car would swing the other way, and I would fishtail down the road. They've now made it easier to correct the oversteer and drift through corners. They've also raised the height of the driver's seat. I understood why the height was so low pre-patch. The devs put so much effort into the car's interior, so they wanted the player to see all of it. The problem is that it made you feel like a kid behind the steering wheel. Now that they've improved this, I've spent my entire second playthrough in the cockpit of the car. There's a good balance between a sense of weight and responsiveness. They've also nailed the feel of the roll and the sway of the car. And of course, the sound design on these cars are excellent. I'm really impressed with what CD Projekt Red did here. I was just expecting a simple driving model like in Far Cry, but instead, they've implemented one of the best driving models in an open world game. But with such a great driving model, it is a shame that there isn't more car chases. I can only recall 2 missions where you have to chase down someone, and they're pretty brief. Hopefully, the DLC will add more car chases, since they already have all the pieces for it. The on-foot traversal is also great. You can make use of a double jump, a mid-air dodge, and a mantle mechanic to run across the rooftops. You really get to experience the verticality in the environment. Getting out of the car and exploring in this manner is the best way to see all of the dense and varied detail that Night City has to offer. My biggest problem with the game right now is the user experience. The crafting is still cumbersome, with the inventory list refreshing every time you dismantle an item. It also still lacks the ability to lock your favorite weapons and armor, making the dismantling process somewhat stressful. The minimap still makes driving harder than it needs to be. I really do hope that the devs implement the race navigation to the rest of the game. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to connect with the story as much as I was able to with the gameplay. The vast majority of your time in the main story will be spent watching cutscenes and listening to dialogue. I found it odd that this bothered me so much, since I normally enjoy games with lots of cutscenes, like Red Dead Redemption 2. I think my problem here was the pacing. Red Dead Redemption 2 spread its cutscenes through a much longer main story, with many more combat encounters. In Cyberpunk, it's not uncommon to have a 45-minute stretch of dialogue, followed by a 10-minute combat encounter, only to return to more dialogue. I wish they were able to mix the combat with the dialogue more frequently, to give the game a faster moment-to-moment pace. I also think that the limitations of the cutscenes playing out in first person may have hampered my experience. We're never able to see V's body language and facial expressions as he's interacting with these characters. The devs also couldn't use different camera techniques to capture the cutscenes like in third-person games. There's also limitations with how characters move about the scene. In third-person games, we'll often see characters get up from their seat when they want to emphasize something, or walk towards a window and gaze outside. While there are moments like this in Cyberpunk, the vast majority of the time, the characters are either sitting in a car or sitting across from each other, giving the scenes a very static feel. This is why it feels more like listening to dialogue rather than watching a scene from a movie. The actual writing, voice acting, and facial animations are all great, however. It's clear that CD Projekt Red put a lot of effort here, and everything feels believable. The story is entertaining and has quite a few memorable moments and set pieces. Now, does the game live up to everything that CD Projekt Red advertised it to be? No, but what they've delivered is a fantastic experience. If you've only played it at launch, or you decided to just wait, I would highly recommend jumping into this game. When I first played Cyberpunk, I tried my best to disconnect my opinion from the fixable bugs and issues, but I couldn't. It was so buried under a myriad of flaws that I couldn't enjoy the game in the way it was intended. CD Projekt Red have finally elevated the game to what it was always meant to be, a top-tier AAA open-world action RPG. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. My name is Devan, and thank you for listening.